So did you know that you're born with two fears? Yeah, two fears. And all the rest of our fears are actually learned. So in today's podcast, we're going to cover one, the two fears that we actually learn, and how we interpret all the others, how they're introduced into our lives, how they appear in our lives. So let's get stuck in. So the science behind fears of what we're actually born with comes from a couple of studies. One is called the visual cliff experiment, which was conducted in 1960 from Gibson and Walk. And basically, researchers placed infants near a glass surface that looked like a kind of a steep drop. They were obviously safe. But even before they could crawl, babies actually refused to cross. They instinctively knew that they had a fear of falling. And that's one of the two fears that we are sort of instinctively have inside of us. So that's that fear of falling. And the other one is called the Moro reflex, and that's a primitive kind of startle reflex. I suppose in a way it's protecting ourselves. And again, newborns instinctively react to sudden arm movement and crying when exposed to a loud noise or a sudden sensation of being dropped. So that loud noise reflex and the fear of falling are the two fundamental fears that are actually sort of ingrained in us, in our DNA as human beings. Everything else that we experience or have as a fear for ourselves is gained through experience, a trauma, our environment, the cultural stories that we're actually fed, school, family patterns, social media, and through observation. So you might see something that's quite traumatic and things like that. So all those other things are actually created through living. So the two fundamental things that we talked about earlier, the two fears that are actually the only things that are real, for want of a better term, are that fear of falling and fear of a loud noise. So isn't that interesting? We have two fundamental fears as human beings, and all the rest of our fears are actually created or manifested by ourselves through, like I said, our environment, through social media, through school, through our upbringing, experiences, trauma that we may have experienced, which means that we actually have the ability to move through those fears and not necessarily fix them, but at least arm ourselves with the ability to recognize that those fears shouldn't really control us as much as they do, because they are essentially created. So I think a lovely thing to recognize here is if only two of those things are actually hardwired for us, then the fears holding us back right now weren't given to you, they were actually taught to us. A bit like installing software on a computer. And anything that we've learned, we can actually unlearn or uninstall like you would software on a computer. As you know, I'm a business owner and I love talking about these things that we navigate as business owners and as entrepreneurial people, as people that work in the online space, whatever you're doing in life. And fears turn up for us in everyday life. And so I think this will be really helpful for a lot of people. One of the big things that we have as human beings throughout many stages of our life is obviously fear of failure. And I experienced this in the online space. I'll be the first one to put my hand up and say, that fear of failure is when you're putting yourself out there and you have the judgment of others. And this all comes from this fear of failure. So not one of the two. I'm just talking globally about, other fears that probably a majority of us have. It comes from the likes of school environments, criticism from others, not wanting to disappoint someone, and early mistakes for being punished, right? So that's the fear of failure. And then we have the fear of success. And this is a huge one that's probably not talked about enough. Fear of success sounds really silly, but this is why a lot of people fail, particularly in business, because, it's the old adage, be careful what you wish for. And when people have a fear of success or a fear of, it's a bit of that tall poppy syndrome. It's a saying we have in Australia here and also in New Zealand about basically standing out above from the rest. So fear of success comes from, and it's rooted in stories like, what if I can't maintain it? What if I lose relationships because of it? What if it changes who I am because of it? And what will people think is probably the biggest one, the fear of success. When it comes to people judging us from the other side of the fence, those inner demons that creep in and talk about, it's like, oh, well, look at them. They think they're holier than thou because they've got the money to do X, Y, Z, or, they are sharing information that they think they're knowledgeable about and they don't know jack. Those fears that we have, that self-talk in our head, are rooted from our own environment and things that we may have been told when we were a kid and things like that. So just keep that in mind as we walk through today's podcast and video. So the next one I want to talk about is fear of judgment. And I think this is really paramount in today's age, with social media playing such a huge part of what we do every day. And I see this working in the entrepreneurial space, as well as having a traditional business that I provide services for. I also work in the online space in high-ticket affiliate marketing. And this is probably one of the biggest things that I actually have to unpack every day, is when I talk to people about the marketing opportunity behind high-ticket affiliate marketing and creating that sort of additional side hustle income. Is the fear of judgment is one of the biggest thing that comes up, and it's one of the biggest things that stops people from actually stepping into the space. Because what comes from fear of judgment is, again, often rooted in our childhood or teenage years, because you don't want to be seen posting online because you think you're being somebody that you're not. You don't want to speak up because, again, you're afraid of the judgment of others, or you might have someone questioning what you're sharing. That's one of my personal ones, is fear of speaking up. Hiding your voice, very similar to not speaking up, but playing small, because we tend to fit to our environment. And I think that's the funny thing about the online spaces, is that the online space is kind of quite unlimited and untapped, and it's our own fear of judgment that actually keeps us playing small, keeps us in our safe zone. And as we all know, we don't achieve anything when we sit in our safe zone. The biggest achievements we have in life are from stepping out of our zone of fear and into just doing it, and bugger the voices and opinions of anybody else, which normally 99% of the time is all foundational stuff within ourselves. So the next one is fear of visibility, obviously the fear of being seen. And this is a really big one for women in particular, when we're talking about being in the wellness and holistic space. Because it's quite a busy environment as well, and there's a lot of people out there sharing a lot of wonderful knowledge, but there's also a lot of people out there, let's just say, selling the sizzle instead of the sausage. That's probably the best way I can put it, is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. But there's also a lot of great information out there. So that fear of visibility is steeped in the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being criticised, and the fear of being too much. And when I say that, for the people listening on the podcast, I did that in air quotes. The fear of being too much is just having that enthusiasm and go-get attitude and being criticised for that. So at number 5 is the fear of change. We are creatures of habit, and our brain loves to keep us in a very safe, familiar face, even if it's not doing us justice and even if it's keeping us miserable. And I think the easiest way to unpack that and see if you're maybe stuck in a little bit of that, in that fear of change cycle, is to look at a period of your life where, if you looked back to a year ago and you're doing exactly the same thing as you were, going through the motions, same shit, different day, as I call it, that's a little bit of fear of change. Everyone should be evolving. Everyone should be moving forward in some way. Even if you're doing something a little bit differently, whether it's through learning, whether it's through exercise, whether it's through creating a side hustle for yourself, whether it's creating savings, everyone should be stepping a little bit outside of their fear of change zone, because it's really powerful. It's as simple as that. And as I said, our brain loves to keep us safe and in a very familiar space. And these fears that I've just run through, 1 through 5, are all very real, absolutely very real. And everyone will be individual to who you are, and that's the great thing. So let's talk about my story, my personal story, to give you guys something tangible to take away. And I'm happy to share this. And I touched on this earlier about, the fear of showing up and the fear of being judged. One of the biggest things I've done is, with this podcast, is obviously turn it into a video, and you might be seeing me instead of listening to me, and that's fantastic. But the inner demons, those fears that sit inside me, were there for probably a year or two. I have no problem turning up on video and talking to people and doing reels, and I used to do tutorial videos for my business, and I still do a few of them. Like, I teach Xero tips and tricks and things like that because I'm a bookkeeper as well. And I love sharing instructional videos because it's very safe, for want of a better term. So I found that really easy. But when I started doing these podcasts and then decided to put them onto YouTube, you're opening the door to every person on the planet. You're not just sharing them with your little intimate circle of friends on Facebook or Instagram. You're actually exposing yourself to everybody in the world to watch that. So someone can click on your video from anywhere in the world. They don't know you from Adam, and they're sitting here listening to you talk about something you profess to know a little bit of knowledge about. And I suppose that's a great caveat for me. I can sit here and say, look, I'm just sharing knowledge that I've shared about, that I've learned about and done research on. Is certainly, sure as hell, does not make me an expert. And that's where fear and the fear of being seen and the fear of being criticised comes into play, because it's real. But imagine if I'd let that fear take hold. Don't get me wrong, every time I upload a video to YouTube, it's petrifying. It's really petrifying, because the minute I hit that upload button and that submit button and I see it's live, it's like, oh, holy crap, am I going to get someone that's going to post a comment? Am I going to get targeted by bots? Or all those fears come rushing in. But we have to put those aside and try and grow through the experience of facing our fears with a little bit of take those rose-coloured glasses off and allow yourself to ask the question, why do I have these fears in the first place, and unpack it a little bit. So as you know, I love to give you guys some tips on how we can move through this, because how do you actually unlearn a fear? And I've touched on a couple, but I'm just going to give you a few practical steps here to let you navigate in your own way to see if we can sort of progress identifying these fears. So number one is, sounds a bit silly, but name your fear without actually judging it. So what is the actual fear here? Break it down a little bit from, I'm afraid of showing up online. Actually break it down. Why are you afraid of showing up online? And when you've answered that question, ask it again. It might be because, you say and are a lot and you don't want to look like an idiot. And then you'd ask the question, why don't I want to look like an idiot? Because then I don't want to be judged. Why don't you want to be judged? See, unpack it a little bit. Number two is, who actually taught me this? Where did this come from? So we're looking at the roots of the fear now. So was it your parents? Was it school? It might have been a teacher that was just a complete, not a perfect specimen of a human being. I think we've all had those types of teachers. There are some amazing teachers out there, and I've had some amazing teachers in my lifetime, but unfortunately for the ones that are amazing, they're the ones that actually undo the damage of all the amazing. So find out where this fear came from, where it was actually learned or where it was taught. Was it a past experience? Was it your parents? Was it society? And when you actually identify where it actually comes from, it actually gives you the ability to give some emotional distance from it. And then number 3 is that you want to pair it with a new truth, right? So instead of, and this is around the language and the verbiage behind it, so instead of saying people will judge me, try saying people that matter or people that need to hear this will connect with me. Or something that's just aligned to what you want to achieve, whatever the case may be. And number 4 is some micro actions. Tiny actions or doing things through like really small iterations are really powerful. And when you do things on a very small scale, it actually retrains your nervous system as well. So some examples of that are, try just, if it's social media, or if it's showing up on camera, just to give you an example, like mine is, it might be like posting 1 story instead of posting 0 stories. You're moving the needle a little bit. Try recording small, achievable things if being on camera is one of them. Try saying yes to something small. And definitely try showing up imperfectly. I'm great at that. I have a huge thing with saying and so and. So I follow a lot of people online about public speaking and things like that. But at the end of the day, I edit out a lot of those ums and so's. But it's who I am. And we get better from practicing, right? Video recording is really powerful because if you do record yourself speaking, right, even if you're reading off a script, and sometimes that's when the ums and the ahs creep in because you're not sure of yourself, and those ums and ahs are just coming through as that fear mechanism tries to keep you protected. What I would suggest is record yourself speaking to the camera with some unprompted script, so those ums and ahs will get in there. And when you play it back listening to yourself so you can hear yourself speak, and try not to cringe every time you hear yourself speaking and throw in ums and ahs and stops and pauses and things like that. But then listen to it with no sound, so turn yourself right down and actually just hear yourself like talking with your lips moving and things like that, and then you'll be aware of your body language. Like, I'm a big hands person, as you can see. That gives your brain somewhere else to focus through your hands. So if you're just sitting there just talking to the camera and it's all very perfunctory and boring and blah 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 blah, it's not interactive. And again, it's giving your thoughts into words, and it's very powerful to introduce body language into the scene because it takes the pressure off you being super wound up and super tight. Okay, so showing up imperfectly is a really, really good one. So these are all micro actions that you can do. And number 5, to finish on, remind yourself this isn't an innate fear. This single sentence reframes everything, or it can reframe everything. So just remind yourself that these fears that you have are not part of the 2 core fears that we are born with, and that is the fear of a loud noise and the fear of falling. So to finish up today, guys, this again was a really fun episode to record for you. I loved doing the research around this. I actually heard this on a podcast myself, and I thought it was something really powerful to share because fear is something that is in everybody's life. whether we like it or not. And I think it's really empowering to know that we have the power to change, or at least start to make those changes within ourselves. So we learn to protect ourselves more, we learn to grow as individuals. So I would love for you guys to share this episode, subscribe to this episode, like this episode, however you're watching. I would really love your support. And yeah, write down the reflections that you have about this episode, and reach out, comment below if you found this useful or you would like to share something with me. And until next time, have an awesome day.